Have you ever been judged just because of the color of your skin, or because someone decided you simply didn't belong? On what seemed like an ordinary flight, a black woman sat quietly in seat 14B, unaware that in just a few hours she'd become the center of a powerful lesson about human decency. The head flight attendant, once praised for her service, looked at her with eyes as cold as steel, refused to serve her, and tossed basic respect aside with pure arrogance. But what she didn't know was that the woman she disrespected was actually a secret inspector, sent to evaluate the entire airline. Now imagine if it were you humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. Would you stay silent just to keep your dignity, or stand up and fight for what's right? This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's about how we choose wisdom over anger, and how justice sometimes comes from the calmest hearts. Hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe, because this flight isn't just through the sky, it's a journey through human conscience. Some flights begin with a round-trip ticket and end with a lesson no one ever forgets. For Aaliyah Brooks, this wasn't just another journey through the clouds. It was a quiet mission between the skies and the prejudice of humankind. That early morning, Chicago International Airport shimmered with light. Loudspeakers echoed constant boarding calls as travelers hurried past. Among them walked Aaliyah brown coat, small suitcase, round glasses. Nothing about her stood out. No one realized that the calm woman in line was actually an undercover investigator for the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA), sent to look into a serious complaint North Sky Airlines accused of racial discrimination against black passengers. Aaliyah had flown hundreds of times under disguise, but this time felt different. A faint instinct whispered that the truth she was about to uncover would make people deeply ashamed once revealed. In her hand was a ticket North Sky flight, 228 destination Los Angeles, economy class, seat 14B. A seat shed chosen carefully close enough to observe service in the middle rows, where staff usually dropped the polite act, but far enough to stay invisible. Before boarding, she sat quietly in the lounge, scrolling through files on her tablet. The anonymous reports were still there. Flight attendant rude to black passengers denied hot meal service, refused to provide a blanket, claiming they were out even as others received one. Each line felt like a small needle, pricking at her belief in fairness. Aaliyah took a slow sip of black coffee. She remembered her supervisor's words before she left. "We don't need a rushed conclusion. We need the truth raw and unbiased. Watch with your eyes and your heart." Shed nodded, then knowing full well sometimes the truth hides in a single glance of contempt more than in 100 words. At gate 47 the line stretched long. First-class passengers were called first, greeted with warm smiles, gentle voices like spring air. But as the economy crowd approached, those smiles thinned. The voices turned mechanical. Aaliyah noticed she didn't need to write it down. She simply observed. The ticket scanner smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks." Aaliyah returned the smile faintly and stepped forward. Her eyes paused on a flight attendant at the door, Chloe Denton. Blonde hair in a tight bun, perfect smile. Badge reading, Senior Flight Attendant. She was radiant while chatting with a white couple in business class, but when her eyes met Aaliyah's, that smile faltered just for half a second. A tiny moment, but for someone like Aaliyah, trained to see bias in motion. Half a second was all it took. Sliding into her seat, she buckled the belt and opened her small notebook, writing the first line with a fountain pen. Initial observation flight attendant Chloe Denton expression changed upon seeing black passenger. No greeting, avoided eye contact. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Welcome aboard North Sky Flight 228 to Los Angeles. Estimated flight time 4 hours, 25 minutes. We hope you have a pleasant journey. Aaliyah looked around. She didn't just see passengers. She saw a miniature society. Up front, businessmen, loud and demanding. In the middle, families, students, workers. Faces caught somewhere between exhaustion and hope. And then her, an ordinary traveler, holding an invisible badge of authority. Don't let them know who you are, her supervisor had warned. Only when they think you're powerless will you truly see their power. The plane rumbled as it taxied. Sunlight spilled across the silver wing outside the window. Aaliyah exhaled slowly. She heard her father's voice in memory. You can dress simply, but you are never ordinary. People may see you however they wish, but you must always know who you are. That saying had become her invisible armor on every mission. As a black woman in an industry that often worshipped a lighter shade of perfect, Aaliyah knew what it meant to be judged by appearance alone. But instead of anger, she chose awareness. Observation was her weapon in truth, her justice. When the attendants handed out warm towels, Aaliyah smiled at the man who served her Ethan Miles, a young attendant with calm, kind eyes. Have a pleasant flight, he said. Thank you, she replied softly, her tone even, her gaze sharp. Up ahead, Chloe Denton was laughing easily with a group of white passengers in row 8. Aaliyah checked her watch and noted the takeoff time. 9:27 a mum. She closed her notebook and whispered to herself, Today, I'm not just a passenger. I am a mirror reflecting how people treat what they don't want to see. The engines roared. The aircraft lifted into the sky. And so began another journey, one of silence, observation, and justice among the clouds. As the plane leveled off above the clouds, Aaliyah glanced out the window. White clouds drifted below like ribbons of cotton, soft and endless. From up here, the world seemed so small, as if all lines of class and color had faded into one shared sky. But she knew better. Fairness only existed when someone brave enough dared to look down and question it. 3 weeks before this flight, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters. Inside were a few neatly typed lines and several grainy phone photos. North Sky Airlines treats black passengers differently. If you care about justice, try flying with them as an ordinary traveler. Attached was a passenger complaint summary, ignored requests, cold attitudes, and the same repeated phrase, Sorry, we're out of blankets conveniently told only to certain people. There was no hard proof, but enough to make the FOA take notice. And among the list of potential investigators, one name was circled Aaliyah Brooks. In a quiet conference room, her supervisor, Samuel Greer, a silver-haired white man with a steady gaze, set the file on the table. North Sky used to have a spotless reputation, he said, but in the past year, complaints have tripled. There are rumors some attendants are prioritizing white passengers. He looked straight at her. We need someone who can see what others refuse to see and won't let emotion cloud their judgment. Aaliyah held his gaze for a moment, silent. She didn't need to ask more. For her, this mission wasn't just about professional duty. It was personal. Aaliyah had grown up in Georgia, during years when America still carried quiet prejudice beneath its polished surface. She'd watched her mother, a devoted nurse, have a patient refuse her touch because her hands were too dark. She'd been followed by a mall security guard just for standing too long near a designer handbag display. And like so many others, she had learned to swallow her anger in silence. So when she joined the FAA, Aaliyah didn't just want to oversee aviation safety. She wanted to oversee human decency. Discrimination doesn't just kill trust. She once said in a staff meeting, "It kills the feeling of being seen as human." In recent years, the American airline industry had been under fire. Viral videos of discrimination sparked outrage online. Hashtags like #TaoFlyFair flooded social media. But there were still things cameras couldn't capture: the looks, the tones, the subtle ways people forgot someone existed, and that those silent moments were exactly what Aaliyah intended to witness. She knew that if North Sky truly had a problem, internal reports would never uncover it. What was needed was a real passenger experience, unfiltered, unannounced. No badge, no authority, just a black woman in seat 14B. And the way the world chose to treat her, the night before the flight, Aaliyah barely slept. She sat by her apartment window in Arlington, the orange glow of highway lights painting the ceiling above. Her laptop screen displayed the inspection checklist, 15 service criteria: greetings, tone, professionalism, conflict handling. But numbers didn't matter to her as much as the truth hidden in gestures and eyes. On her desk stood an old photo of her father smiling in his Air Force uniform. "Justice doesn't need to shout," he used to say. "It just needs to be done quietly, but firmly." Aaliyah nodded to herself. Sometimes, to change a system, you had to walk inside it as part of it. The next morning, she received her ticket and route details. Flight North Sky, 228. One of the most frequently complained about routes. Something in her gut told her this wouldn't be a peaceful trip. No team, no hidden cameras, just a discreet voice recorder clipped inside her coat and a slim leather notebook. Everything was legal, but what mattered most wasn't the gear. It was control of her temper, her tone, her truth. She whispered to herself, "Don't get angry. Don't let anger cloud the truth." To Aaliyah, a plane was a compressed society trapped in a metal tube, thousands of feet in the air. You couldn't walk away. You couldn't hide. That's when true behavior revealed itself. She had once written in her journal, "On the ground, people can pretend equality. In the air, when we breathe the same air, you see who they really are." And deep down, she knew this flight would expose more than just a company's problem. It would reveal a mirror of human nature itself. Back in the cabin, Aaliyah rested her hand on her notebook. She didn't know what the next few hours would bring, but she was ready. Part of her wanted to prove the airline industry could still change. But more than that, she wanted to prove that people could choose intellect over outrage. Because she knew, sometimes, the greatest strength doesn't come from power, but from staying calm when you're being disrespected. The soft clang of a beverage cart broke her thoughts. Aaliyah looked up. Chloe Denton was approaching, her face expressionless, her eyes gliding over Aaliyah as if she weren't there. Aaliyah smiled faintly and closed her notebook. "All right then," she thought. "Let's see where justice begins." The metallic clatter of the drink cart echoed faintly in Aaliyah's mind, like a rhythm tapping against her thoughts. She knew every story began with small details: how people looked at you, how they smiled or how they didn't. And even before the plane took off, the truth always started to show back on the ground. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport on a morning rush hour was a symphony of chaos, constant announcements, suitcase wheels screeching across tile, the smell of coffee mixing with disinfectant. But amid all that movement, Aaliyah always found what others missed: the way people treated each other when they thought no one was paying attention. She walked slowly through the North Sky Airlines check-in counter. The staff greeted a well-dressed white couple beside her with glowing smiles and bright voices. "Good morning, flying business class. Right this way. Please, priority lane for you." Then came Aaliyah's turn. The smile softened. The tone cooled just a few degrees. "Hello? Flight 228, seat 14B. Any checked bags today?" It was still polite technically, but to someone trained to hear emotion between words, that subtle chill was as clear as metal scraping glass. Aaliyah smiled faintly, nodded, and walked on. In her thin leather notebook, she wrote, "Formally courteous. Emotional temperature, inconsistent between guest groups. Indication of latent bias." The North Sky waiting lounge gleamed neat rows of leather seats, television screens looping ads of smiling flight attendants offering blankets and help to elderly passengers. But when Aaliyah looked around, she saw a different picture. A middle-aged black man approached the counter to ask about a delayed flight. The attendant, tired-looking, replied curtly, "You'll know when it's announced. Please wait." Moments later, a white woman asked the exact same question. The same attendant's tone softened instantly. "Of course, ma'am. Let me check that for you right away." Same question, same staff. Two very different tones. Aaliyah tilted her head, watching. Some people noticed, most didn't. That tiny moment of inequity passed like it was invisible, just like prejudice often does, existing quietly, needing no witness, no confession. Some things can't be written in a report, she thought. A single glance can make someone feel smaller. Discrimination doesn't always come from action. Sometimes it's in the silence between them. She exhaled softly. She wasn't here to judge individuals. She was here to expose the system that shaped them. Aaliyah stopped at a cafe near Gate 47. The line was long. The cashier smiled brightly at the businessmen ahead of her. When it was Aaliyah's turn, the smile vanished. Voice flat. Black coffee medium? Right. She nodded. "Yes, thank you." The cup landed hard on the tray, splashing a few drops. Aaliyah didn't say a word. She simply wiped it clean with a napkin. Everyone's polite, she thought, until they no longer need to be. Her face stayed calm, but her mind recorded every nuance like ink pressed into memory. When the loudspeaker called North Sky Flight 228 now boarding, Aaliyah was ready. She watched the familiar hierarchy unfold, men in suits striding through the priority lane, mothers with children shuffling behind, elderly passengers struggling as attendants repeated instructions with forced smiles. A gate agent spoke into the mic, "First Class and North Sky Elite members, please board at this time." Her voice turned lilting, cheerful. Minutes later, she switched to calling economy passengers. The tone dropped, flat and mechanical. Aaliyah noticed the shift immediately. Some frowned. Others didn't care. To her, this was the invisible rhythm of discrimination, not born from hatred, but from habit. It lived in tone, posture, and indifference. From a distance, Aaliyah spotted Chloe Denton, the lead flight attendant for this flight. Perfect smile, flawless uniform in navy blue, posture straight like a poster model. Beside her stood Ethan Miles, calm and soft-eyed, greeting passengers kindly. Chloe shook hands with an older white man, her voice sugar-sweet. "Welcome aboard, sir. North Sky is honored to have you with us." Then a young black woman approached Chloe, only gave a nod. No smile. Ethan, however, bowed his head slightly and offered a genuine grin to everyone in line. From where Aaliyah stood, the contrast was impossible to miss. Two people, two attitudes, same uniform, she thought, that the world condensed into a jet bridge. Everything in the airport gleamed glass, lights, polished floors, crisp uniforms. But the real divide wasn't in appearances. It was in the eyes, in the voices, things no surveillance camera could record. Aaliyah realized something ironic. This airport, the most neutral place in the world, where everyone went through the same metal detectors, was also where bias showed itself most clearly, because people assumed no one was really watching. She smiled quietly. But I'm watching, she thought, tightening her grip on her bag as she approached the gate. Each step brought her closer to the truth she'd been sent to uncover. Ahead, Chloe Denton waited, her smile bright and rehearsed. But when Aaliyah drew near, that brightness dimmed, replaced by a fleeting chill, the look reserved for someone who doesn't belong. Aaliyah nodded politely, keeping her own small smile. In her deep brown eyes, there was no anger, only sharp, steady observation, the kind that saw through performance. Let's see, she thought, who's really serving whom? She stepped onto the jet bridge. The door closed behind her. North Sky Flight 228 was officially airborne, and with it began a quiet test of humanity above the clouds. When the airplane door sealed shut, the outside world went silent. The low hum of the engines felt heavy, like the slow heartbeat of some great creature about to wake. Aaliyah took a deep breath, sensing the enclosed air around her, a self-contained world, where everyone would soon play their part, unaware that a quiet observer sat among them. The cabin of North Sky Flight 228 glowed with a soft, sterile light. White panels reflected off polished metal. Rows of navy blue leather seats stood in perfect order, divided by a narrow aisle, the invisible line where power, class, and attitude would collide. Aaliyah settled into seat 14B, fastened her belt. Beside her sat a middle-aged Asian woman, who offered a polite nod and a gentle smile before turning back to her book. Up front, Chloe Denton, the senior flight attendant, was checking her manifest one last time. She looked immaculate hair in a flawless bun, deep red lipstick, uniform crisp enough to slice glass. But her eyes held a chill, that quiet kind of authority born from believing you stand a little higher than everyone else. Next to her stood Ethan Miles, the junior attendant. He didn't stand out, but the way he spoke soft, patient, with eyes that actually saw people seemed to warm the air around him. Chloe and Ethan. Aaliyah wrote in her notebook, two halves of one airline, one the polished fod, the other the soul that keeps it human. As the plane taxied down the runway, Chloe began her walk through the aisle, heels clicking in perfect rhythm. Her smile was textbook polite, symmetrical, and soulless. Good morning, everyone. Please fasten your seatbelts. But as she reached rows 10 through 12, her tone softened. Her smile turned real. 3 well-dressed white passengers sat there, business travelers. From the look of it, headed on business or pleasure, she asked brightly. Thank you for choosing North Sky. Let me know if you need anything at all. A few rows later, a young black man struggled to fit his bag into the overhead bin. Chloe's face shifted instantly. Sir, please hurry, she said sharply. We need to close the bins. No warmth, no patience. The man froze, murmured an apology, and sat down. Aaliyah didn't write not yet. Some truths didn't need ink. They branded themselves in silence. Shed met people like Chloe before, professional performers in customer service, fluent in fake smiles. But pretense always cracks when the audience stops applauding. Discrimination doesn't live in procedures, Aaliyah thought. It lives in tone. Chloe wasn't evil, just convinced that her position gave her the right to decide who deserved respect. While Chloe hurried through the aisle, Ethan was in the back, helping an elderly woman fold her blanket. It's all right, Mom, he said kindly. Let me handle that for you. His voice carried genuine care, the kind that didn't need training. Chloe turned, frowning. Ethan, could you move a little faster? Please. We still have our checklist. He nodded. Quiet. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did calm, tired, aware. He knew something was wrong. He just chose silence. Aaliyah caught that look, that fragile, wordless moment between them. One person trying to control, the other choosing to yield. Every unjust system survives because good people stay quiet, she thought. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Chloe began beverage service. She stopped at Aaliyah's row, eyes flicking briefly to the seat tag A. Brooks. "What would you like to drink?" she asked flatly. "Water. Please." "Thank you." Chloe set the cup down without looking at her. The water sloshed, spilling slightly over the rim. "Apologies, must be filled it too high," she murmured, already turning away. Aaliyah dabbed the spill with a napkin, calm, unbothered. Inside, though, she felt something deeper, not anger, but recognition. That familiar, quiet sting of being tolerated rather than seen. Ethan followed with the cart moments later. He noticed the spill, glanced at her kindly. "Would you like me to get you a new cup?" "That's all right," Aaliyah smiled. He nodded, moved on. Simple kindness, no performance. Two attitudes. Same job. She noted, one reveals authority, the other, humanity. On this flight, distance wasn't measured in rows, it was measured in how people made others feel. Chloe served by rulebook. Ethan served from conscience. And that invisible gap between the two was the space where prejudice lived. Aaliyah remembered something her old professor once told her at the Aviation Academy. Modern racism doesn't need shouting. It just needs one cold glance and one smile withheld. Back then, it sounded like theory. Now, it was playing out right in front of her. An hour later, the cabin was quiet. Chloe sat in the jump seat, scrolling through her phone, occasionally scanning the rows with an air of boredom. Ethan was still up, adjusting a passenger's seat, helping a mother reach her bag, smiling softly the whole time. Aaliyah closed her notebook and looked toward the front of the plane. She didn't need more proof the picture was complete. North Sky rewarded surface perfection and forgot the foundation of respect. As the cabin lights dimmed, clouds drifted outside the window like soft tides below. Aaliyah's reflection in the glass stared back calm, composed, resolute. The flight has only just begun, she thought. But sometimes people don't realize they're the ones being evaluated. She leaned back, her gaze fixed on Chloe at the front, still poised in her illusion of control. "Let's see," she whispered to herself, "just how high she'll fly before she falls." The metallic rattle of the drink cart echoed down the narrow aisle, steady, cold, deliberate. It wasn't loud, yet in that confined space, every clink and roll sounded amplified, clear enough to betray the mood of the person pushing it. Aaliyah looked up, and with just a few steps of observation, she knew the moment she'd been waiting for was about to happen. Chloe Denton glided down the aisle, her service cart gleaming like polished chrome, her smile flawless, rehearsed, switched on as easily as a light. "Good afternoon. What would you like to drink? Orange juice?" "Of course, soda. You'll bring that right back." Her voice was warm, sing-song, her eyes bright and animated, but only for the people she wanted to see. When she reached row 14, where Aaliyah sat, that glow vanished. Chloe stopped. Her eyes flicked past Aaliyah, landing somewhere over her shoulder. "Drink?" she asked, flat, mechanical, stripped of tone. "Water, please." "Thank you," Aaliyah said softly. Chloe nodded. No smile, no acknowledgement. She poured the water quickly, set it down on the tray too hard, a few drops spilling over the rim. "Here. No, please. No, enjoy your drink. No eye contact." And then she pushed the cart away as if the woman in seat 14B simply didn't exist. Seconds later, Aaliyah heard her again, that same voice, now melodic and kind, directed at the White family in row 15. "Oh, aren't you adorable? Do you want apple juice or orange juice, sweetheart? Here's a little cookie for you, a North Sky treat." The little girl giggled. Her mother smiled, replying, "You're so sweet." "Thank you," and Chloe's perfect smile returned, radiant but selective, following behind. Ethan Miles noticed Aaliyah hadn't touched her glass. He stopped beside her, voice low, gentle. "Is everything all right?" "Mom, do you need anything else?" "I'm fine. Thank you," Aaliyah said with a calm smile. "All right. If you need anything, just press the call button." He meant it. She could tell. That single moment brief, genuine, reminded her that kindness didn't need a uniform policy. She opened her notebook and wrote quickly. "Lead attendant Chloe Denton, clear contrast in tone and body language between white and black passengers. No greeting, no eye contact. Rough gesture placing cup, and beneath that, one more line. Personal reaction, calm, no confrontation." Aaliyah paused, staring into her cup. The clear water reflected her face, calm on the surface, sharp beneath. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "Not everyone deserves your anger, sweetheart. Some people only deserve your observation." She nodded faintly. This wasn't the time to get angry. She was here to witness, to record, to prove, not to win a petty argument. Across the aisle, an older black man had seen the exchange. He frowned, leaning toward his wife. "She's cold, isn't she?" His wife sighed softly. "We're used to it." "Honey," the words reached Aaliyah's ears quiet as a breath, heavy as stone. They weren't angry. They weren't surprised. They were simply resigned. That, Aaliyah thought, was how the system survived, not through hatred, but through quiet acceptance. Discrimination on a plane doesn't need insults. It only needs selective warmth. A nod to one passenger, a glance away from another, that's all it takes to redraw invisible lines between valued customers and people who don't matter. Inside a sealed cabin, where everyone breathes the same recycled air, small details become loud declarations. And Chloe Denton, without saying a word, had made her message unmistakably clear. She served by skin tone, not by duty. When the cart returned to collect cups, Aaliyah decided to try something. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Could I have another cup of water? Please." Chloe turned, one eyebrow arching. "You still have some left." Her tone was calm, but laced with irritation. "Oh, I know. Am just a bit thirsty. If that's all right, we have other passengers to serve. If there's any left when I'm done, he'll bring you some." It was short, dismissive, just long enough for a few nearby passengers to glance up. Ethan, behind her, hesitated. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He exhaled quietly and kept pushing the cart. Aaliyah simply smiled. "That's all right. Thank you." She dabbed the tray with a napkin, cleaning the spilled drops herself. Her supervisor's words came back to her. "Anger will make them believe their prejudice is justified. Calm will force them to confront themselves." Aaliyah wondered what would happen if she did speak up. She knew the answer: she'd be recorded, labeled difficult, and the system would rush to protect its own by turning the victim into the problem. Justice, she realized, wasn't about loud outrage. It was about controlled composure in the face of insult. She wrote her final note for the section, "Confirm clear signs of preferential treatment." Next objective, observe staff response when another black passenger requests assistance. As the cart rolled forward, Ethan lingered a moment beside her. He lowered his voice. "Ms. Brooks, "Am sorry if my coworker made you uncomfortable." Aaliyah smiled, her tone kind but firm. "You didn't do anything wrong. Everyone serves in their own way." Ethan nodded, his expression honest, burdened by quiet guilt. Up front, Chloe was laughing again, radiant, gracious, perfectly polished with the passengers in row 8. Her smile glittered under the cabin lights, but Aaliyah saw it for what it was, a mirror reflecting only certain faces. She closed her pen, her gaze steady. The disappointment was gone, replaced by calm focus, the patience of someone waiting for truth to reveal itself. This is just the beginning, she thought. Sometimes, the smallest gestures expose the biggest truths. The meal service light blinked on overhead. A new phase of the flight and a new test was about to begin. The airplane had sunk into a hush. Cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow, the engines humming like the steady breath of some enormous creature asleep among the clouds. Aaliyah drew her jacket tighter, resting her head against the seat, but the chill seeping from the air vents wasn't just from the temperature. It was the kind of cold that came from people from the subtle cruelty she'd just witnessed. She pressed the call button. A small amber light blinked above her. Moments later, Chloe Denton appeared. Her expression caught somewhere between annoyance and duty. "What do you need?" she asked flatly, the words crisp, practiced but hollow. Aaliyah gave a polite smile, her voice calm. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm a little cold. Could I please have a blanket?" Chloe's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. Half amusement, half disdain. "Blankets are for first class only. If you want one, you can buy at $10 each." She emphasized the word buy, as if reminding Aaliyah exactly where she stood in the invisible hierarchy of the sky. Aaliyah nodded without hesitation. "That's fine. I'll buy one." Chloe blinked, momentarily thrown off, maybe surprised that this simply dressed black woman didn't argue, didn't flinch, just agreed. "All right." She turned, rummaged through the cart, and pulled out a thin, plastic-wrapped blanket. Then, without meeting Aaliyah's eyes, she tossed it onto the tray table hard enough for the plastic to pop loudly. No thank you. No smile. No decency. She turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence that weighed heavier than the hum of the engines. The Asian woman sitting beside Aaliyah glanced over, frowning slightly. A man in the row ahead turned, disapproval flickering across his face. But no one spoke. The whole cabin seemed to hold its breath. Aaliyah stayed still. She opened the blanket quietly, spreading it over her lap with calm, deliberate movements. In that moment, her silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. At the back of the aisle, Ethan Miles had seen it all. He paused mid-step, discomfort etched across his face. When Chloe disappeared into the galley, he stepped forward and spoke softly. "Ms. Brooks, I'm sorry about that. Let me get you a thicker blanket." "That's all right," Aaliyah said gently. "You don't have to apologize for someone else." "Maybe," he murmured, his voice low. "But sometimes silence is a kind of guilt." Then he walked on, his expression heavy with quiet shame. "There are things they don't cover in customer service training, how to show respect without checking a ticket class first." Aaliyah had seen it 100 times before. People like Chloe hiding behind policy, using rules as armor for prejudice. "I'm just following procedure," they always said. But what they were really doing was deciding who counted as human. On airplanes, tiny replicas of society in motion power was mapped by rows. First class at the front, served first, smiled at first, and everyone else waited. but the arrogance of small authority a tossed blanket. A cold tone revealed something far greater than one person's bad manners. It was a perfect reflection of the world below. Aaliyah reached for her notebook, its leather cover cool under her fingers. She wrote slowly, each letter deliberate. Lead Attendant Chloe Denton, overt display of disrespect. Statement: blankets are for first class only. If you want one, buy it for $10. Behavior through item on passenger's tray table. Assessment clear class-based discrimination. She closed the book, touching the pen lightly to her lips, a quiet smile. Not of joy, but of certainty. The truth, she thought, was exposing itself without her needing to lift a finger. Up front, Chloe's voice carried low as she spoke to Ethan. See, she bought it anyway. I followed policy. Ethan didn't look at her. The way you say things, he said softly, and the way you do them, that what people remember. Chloe, she shot him a sharp look. We're not supposed to overstep. First class has its privileges, you know that. Yeah, Ethan replied quietly, but respect shouldn't have a seat number. For once. Chloe said nothing. She turned away, eyes cold, lips pressed tight. The engines kept their steady rhythm, but between the two of them, the air felt heavier than before. Aaliyah gazed out the window. The soft blue of the night sky spilled across her face, mixing with the faint reflection of her own eyes, steady, unreadable. She knew she'd just witnessed the first open act of disrespect, and with it, she now had the first undeniable proof that would shake this airline's polished image. But what lingered wasn't the act itself. It was the silence surrounding it. No one defended her. No one challenged it. People just accepted it. And that quiet acceptance was how injustice learned to breathe. The woman beside her finally spoke, voice low. Aren't you going to tell a manager? The way she treated you was awful. Aaliyah smiled faintly, still facing forward. No. She'll reveal herself soon enough. The woman blinked. You're very patient. Not patient, Aaliyah replied softly. I just want her to see her own mistake, not be told about it. Minutes later, the overhead speakers crackled, and Chloe's polished voice filled the cabin again. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be serving a light meal shortly. Please remain seated. Her tone was perfectly professional, smooth as silk as if nothing had happened. But Aaliyah knew better. All it would take was a few more passengers treated the same way, and the full picture would come into view. She looked toward Chloe, then wrote one final note for the entry. When small power is given to someone without empathy, it becomes a weapon of humiliation. Pulling the blanket over her shoulders, Aaliyah closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to wait. She could feel it coming. The first ripple of the storm that was about to break at 30,000 feet. The engines droned steadily, the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of a world suspended between clouds, far from the earth and all those ideals of equality humanity liked to brag about. After the $10 blanket incident, the cabin had fallen into an uneasy quiet, not the calm of comfort, but the silence that settles when everyone senses something is wrong. Aaliyah sat still, her hand resting lightly on her leather notebook, feeling every small tremor of the plane through her palm. She knew one thing for certain when injustice goes unchecked. It doesn't stop, it spreads, and it wouldn't take long for it to find its next target. About an hour later, the attendants began their second drink service. Passengers had relaxed some reading, some watching movies, children asleep against their mothers' shoulders. Aaliyah leaned slightly toward the aisle to observe. Chloe Denton was pushing the service cart again, Ethan Miles beside her. A few rows ahead, a black woman in her early 30s sat with her young daughter. She wore her hair in neat braids, her smile soft, her focus on the laptop balanced on her knees. When Chloe approached, the woman slipped off her headphones and smiled politely. "Excuse me, could I have a little more water for my daughter?" Please, Chloe didn't meet her eyes. "1 cup per passenger." "Oh, I understand. It's just that she's a little rules are rules, ma'am." Her tone was clipped, cool, final. She moved on before the mother could say another word. The little girl looked up. "Mommy, is she mad at us?" Her mother smiled gently, brushing the child's hair. "It's okay. Baby, some people just forget how to speak kindly." Aaliyah felt her chest tighten. She didn't need to write anything down, not yet. Because a few minutes later, what she'd expected happened. The little girl fidgeted with her tray table, and in a blink, her cup-tipped water spilling everywhere, soaking the woman's skirt. "I'm sorry," Mommy the child gasped. Ethan was beside them instantly, kneeling, his tone calm and warm. "It's all right, sweetheart. No harm done." He grabbed napkins, blotting the tray on the floor. "Chloe, can you hand me some extra wipes?" Chloe was right behind him, but she didn't move. She barely glanced over. "You've got napkins in your kit." "I'm busy with row 10. Then she turned away, already smiling again, laughing with a young white couple taking selfies with their cocktails. Aaliyah's pen moved across the page in swift, sure strokes. Row 18. Black female passenger with child. Incident spilled drink. Attendant Ethan Miles quick. Kind response. Lead attendant Chloe Denton ignored request for help. Displayed passive discrimination. She paused, eyes following Chloe's retreating figure. It's not that she didn't see. It's that she chose not to. Her training in behavioral psychology came back to her. Bias in just what you do. It's what you choose not to do. And Chloe Denton, once praised for being graceful and professional, was now dismantling that illusion, one small action at a time. Ethan crouched again, meeting the little girl's eyes. "Don't worry, kiddo. It's just a little spill. Who knows? Maybe one day you'll fly planes instead of riding them." The girl giggled. Her mother smiled, touched. Thank you. It's rare to see that kind of patience these days." "I just think everyone deserves kindness," Ethan said quietly, "no matter what seat they're in." The line was soft, but it carried through the cabin like a clear bell. Aaliyah looked at him, and in that glance, she saw what Chloe never could: genuine compassion, the kind that didn't need authority to exist. In that sealed capsule of air where everyone was forced to sit still together, bias did more than hurt feelings. It eroded trust. Aaliyah realized that the other passengers' silence wasn't ignorance. It was fatigue. They'd seen too many moments like this before. She scanned the rows. Some frowned. Others looked away. No one spoke up. It was the same pattern society always followed: silence, because the injustice wasn't happening to them. Ethan glanced back and caught her watching. Her expression wasn't that of a passenger. It was the look of someone who saw him and everything he was trying to do. He nodded faintly, a small smile of recognition. Two people, opposite sides of the same line. He the decent man inside a flawed system. She the observer sent to expose it. When Chloe passed row 18 again, she spotted the damp patch still on the floor. She frowned. "Next time, be careful. All right, try not to make a mess. We don't have time to clean up after everyone." The mother looked up. "Steady. I didn't spill it." "My daughter." "Then maybe watch her more closely." Chloe cut in, her tone slicing like glass. The air thickened. The woman turned away, pulling her daughter close. Chloe's heels clicked down the aisle again, cold, precise, the sound of someone who believed they were still right. Aaliyah watched the woman wipe her daughter's hands, murmur comfort, and thank Ethan again with a tired smile. Sometimes, Aaliyah thought, discrimination doesn't come from hate. It comes from the comfort of thinking you're allowed to look down. She closed her notebook, fingers tightening on the worn leather cover. And when small power goes unchecked, she wrote, it becomes the first crack in the glass of justice. At the front of the plane, Chloe was still radiant, laughing with passengers from the premium rows, her smile perfect, her tone sweet. But to Aaliyah, it all looked like a performance on borrowed time. In her chest, the fire of conviction burned not loud, not wild, but steady. The story was writing itself, line by line, gesture by gesture. And soon, when the wheels touched the ground, nothing that happened on North Sky 228 would stay hidden. The steady hum of the engines carried on the slow pulse of a world suspended above the earth, detached not just from land, but from the ideals of equality humanity liked to preach about. After the incident with the young mother, the air inside the cabin felt stretched thin. No one spoke above a whisper, but every glance, every flick of the eyes, carried unspoken weight. Aaliyah could feel it. She didn't need more evidence now. It was revealing itself. All she had to do was wait to see just how far Chloe Denton's true nature would go. The speakers crackled, followed by that familiar polished voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin our in-flight meal service. Please lower your tray tables and return your seats to the upright position. Warm aromas spread through the air, peppered chicken, toasted bread, the faint bitterness of brewed coffee. Aaliyah set her notebook aside, unbuckled her seat belt, and pulled down her tray. Around her, a few passengers shifted subtly, the same people who had witnessed Chloe's earlier behavior. They didn't speak, but their eyes said it all. Let's see what happens next. Chloe pushed the cart down the aisle, her practiced smile perfectly in place, a performance of professionalism. But like always, it wasn't a smile meant for everyone. When she reached row 14, her tone changed. You're the one who declined your meal earlier. Correct. I've marked that down. Aaliyah looked up, calm. No, I didn't refuse. You must be mistaken. Chloe's lips twitched into something between a smirk and disbelief. Oh, really? Well, I have your name right here. You said you didn't want to eat. I said I'd have it later, once I was done with some work. I never refused. Her voice was soft but steady, her gaze direct enough to make Chloe's confidence falter for a fraction of a second. Fine, Chloe said sharply. If you want it, here. She dropped the meal tray onto Aaliyah's table. Clatter the sound of metal echoing through the narrow space. A few passengers flinched. No napkin, no utensils. A piece of lettuce flew out of the plastic container, landing on Aaliyah's coat. Row 14B went silent. A woman behind them sucked in a quiet gasp. A couple in front exchanged uneasy looks. At the end of the aisle, Ethan Miles froze. His jaw tightened as he hurried forward. Chloe, you forgot to give her utensils. No, she said she didn't need them. Chloe lied smoothly, still not looking at Aaliyah. Ethan's hand tightened on the cart handle. I was standing right here. She didn't say that. A tense beat of silence. Chloe turned to him with a forced laugh. What? Are you questioning me now? Ethan, reminding you, he said quietly, about procedure and about respect. Aaliyah picked the fallen lettuce off her coat, set it back on the tray, and spoke evenly. Fine. Thank you for the meal. Her voice carried through the cabin, not loud, not bitter, but controlled. It was the kind of composure that commanded respect. Several passengers looked at her differently now, admiration flickering in their eyes. She hadn't lashed out. She hadn't argued. She had simply refused to let Chloe's pettiness define her. Chloe, flustered, straightened and snapped. "If you need anything else, press the call button." Then she pushed the cart away, her back stiff as armor. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Did she just throw that tray? Unbelievable. She's been acting different with her since the start. An elderly white man in row 12, who had stayed silent all flight, spoke just loud enough to be heard that black ladies got more class than that flight attendant ever will. Heads nodded. The balance in the room shifted. People who once pretended not to see now did see, and once you've seen injustice, you can't unsee it. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, not from anger, but from clarity. When injustice becomes obvious, she thought, justice doesn't need shouting, it needs patience. She wrote, her pen gliding in neat, deliberate strokes. Chloe Denton lied publicly before passengers. Actions disrespect. Through tray. Withheld utensils. Witnesses passengers. Rows 1315 attendant Ethan Miles. She closed the notebook. A faint gleam in her eyes, the calm brightness of someone watching truth dig its own grave. In the galley, Ethan caught up to Chloe. "What are you doing?" "She kept staring at me like I was wrong," Chloe snapped, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You didn't notice she's testing me. She asked for food. You don't get it." "Ethan, some people think they can have whatever they want just because they're special." "No, Chloe," he said evenly. "You're the one who thinks you're special." Chloe froze. Color rose to her cheeks, her lips pressed thin. She turned away, muttering, "You'll see. People like that always complain about something." The hum of the plane filled the silence that followed a metallic, endless whisper. Inside that capsule of air, 30,000 feet high, a quiet war of dignity was unfolding. There were no raised voices, no physical blows, just prejudice dressed in the uniform of professionalism. But this time, everyone saw it, and the silence that followed wasn't compliance anymore. It was awareness. A little girl whispered to her mother, "Mommy, why didn't that lady smile at the nice woman?" Her mother replied softly, "Maybe she forgot that a smile is part of good service, too." Aaliyah picked up the plastic utensils Ethan had quietly set beside her, cut a piece of bread, and took a slow bite. Her eyes followed Chloe as she moved through the aisle, every motion of hers now reflected in a dozen watchful gazes, and Chloe felt it. For the first time, she felt the weight of being seen. Aaliyah smiled faintly, not from triumph, but from certainty. Justice was no longer a theory in her notebook. It was unfolding, breath by breath. When small power is tested, she thought, true character is revealed. The plane sliced through a band of thin clouds, its lights glinting faintly in the darkness. No one aboard knew it yet, but somewhere over the endless night sky, a quiet test of conscience had just reached its breaking point. After the meal service, the cabin air felt thick heavy, like the calm before a storm. Every laugh, every whisper grew quieter, more careful. Everyone could feel it. Now something was deeply off on this flight. No one saw what happened between Chloe Denton and Aaliyah Brooks as a small thing anymore. It was like a drop of ink in a glass of clear water spreading, deepening, impossible to hide. A soft chime rang out from row 18 where Tara Simmons sat with her daughter. Chloe approached, her voice flat. "What do you need?" Tara's tone was calm, but firm. "I've pressed the call button 3 times. My daughter needs more water, and I'd like a napkin. The tray's still sticky." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "I believe you've been served enough." Being served enough. Tara said evenly. "Doesn't mean being ignored." Her voice stayed polite, but it carried steel. A few nearby passengers lifted their heads. At the back of the aisle, Ethan Miles immediately stepped forward. "It's okay. I've got it. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "Mom." Tara thanked him quietly, while Chloe turned away, her expression icy. Half an hour later, after the plane leveled off into its long, steady cruise, Tara asked if she could change seats so her daughter could sleep more comfortably. Ethan nodded, helping her move to row 14, right beside Aaliyah. The two women exchanged a look, one of quiet understanding. "Did she treat you badly, too?" Tara asked in a low voice, her composure unshaken. "I think it's not just me," Aaliyah replied softly. "Have you noticed she's only warm with certain passengers?" "Oh, I've noticed." Tara sighed. "I work in customer service myself. I know that look when someone decides what you're worth before you say a single word." Silence fell between them for a moment. Outside the window, the clouds stretched in peaceful stillness, a fake peace. Inside, something deeper was gathering. Not rage, but quiet resolve. A black man a few rows ahead turned slightly in his seat. "She did the same to me," he said under his breath. "I asked for more coffee. She pretended not to hear. Then turned around and laughed with a white couple." A young Latina woman from row 16 leaned forward. I noticed it too. She looked at me like I'd done something wrong just for asking for a drink. The murmurs spread slow, steady, unstoppable. What began as one woman's story was now becoming everyone's. Aaliyah didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. She knew that truth was most powerful when spoken by many voices, not one. As Chloe walked the aisle again, she felt it the shift. Eyes that once looked away now met hers directly, especially from passengers of color calm, steady, unafraid. That silence, that collective gaze, unnerved her more than any outburst could have. Ethan leaned toward her and murmured, "Maybe ease up a little. People are talking." "Let them," Chloe said with a faint, brittle laugh. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Ethan said quietly. "They're seeing how you're doing it." She froze for half a second. Then her jaw tightened. "You don't understand. Ethan, some people want to be victims." Tara turned to Aaliyah. "You know, I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just tired. Tired of always having to prove I deserve respect." Aaliyah smiled gently. "I've felt that too. But sometimes we don't have to prove anything. The truth already carries its own weight." Tara studied her, eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "You sound like someone who's seen this before." "Let's just say," Aaliyah replied softly, "I've been in aviation long enough to notice, and this time I'm observing a little more closely." Tara looked as if she wanted to ask more, but Aaliyah only smiled and shook her head. Not yet. Not until the story was done, writing itself. Then, something remarkable happened. Passengers started pressing the call buttons not to complain, but to speak up. A man said clearly, "We'd like to speak to another lead attendant. Please." A woman of African descent raised her voice. She should apologize to the woman in row 14. We all saw what happened. The murmurs grew louder, rippling down the cabin like a rising tide. The airplane, once silent and orderly, had become a floating courtroom in the clouds. Chloe tried to hold her composure, but her smile was cracking. "Please, everyone, remain calm," she said tightly. "Any complaints will be handled after landing." But her words fell flat, drowned in the quiet rebellion of dozens of watchful eyes. For the first time, she wasn't in control. On a plane, there's nowhere to go, no door to slam, no hallway to escape into. Everyone has to stay to see, to face, to confront. And in that pressurized cabin, people began to truly look at one another. They saw who held power, they saw who was being dismissed, and they saw who refused to stay silent anymore. Aaliyah could feel it, the energy shifting. This was fear now. It was solidarity. The passengers, once strangers, were forming a quiet alliance built on dignity. At 30,000 feet, above borders and skin tones, they had found common ground, the shared will to stand against what was wrong. When the murmuring grew too loud, Ethan leaned close to Chloe once more. "You should take a step back. Let me handle it." "No," she snapped. "It's my job." "Chloe," he said, meeting her eyes, "sometimes the person with the most power is the one who knows when to be silent." Chloe turned away, her lips trembling slightly. Her heart pounded, not from exhaustion, but from something new, fear. For the first time, she was afraid of being seen. Aaliyah closed her notebook. She wrote one last line, her handwriting precise and calm. "The truth has been witnessed. It no longer needs defense." Then she looked around the cabin at the passengers of different colors, ages, and stories, all now connected by one simple thing, the courage to acknowledge what they saw. The plane continued through the night sky, but something inside it had shifted course. Chloe Denton, once certain of her control, now sat in the stillness of her own undoing. And Aaliyah Brooks quiet, steady. Watching knew the report she would write after landing wouldn't just change a flight. It might change an entire culture of silence. The air in the cabin thickened not from temperature, but from tension. It was the kind of silence that came after something had cracked. But before anyone dared to admit it out loud, Chloe Denton, who once ruled this narrow aisle with crisp smiles and practiced charm, was losing her grip. She needed to prove she still held control, that everyone else was just overreacting. But in her desperation to reclaim power, she chose the wrong person to test. About 30 minutes before landing, the lights had dimmed. Half the passengers had drifted to sleep. Aaliyah Brooks remained awake, watching the soft amber streaks of sunset smear across the clouds outside her window. Her throat was dry. She pressed the call button. A soft ding. Chloe turned, her smile brittle. Behind her polite expression was fatigue, or maybe irritation from being watched too long. "What do you need?" she asked, voice cool and clipped. "Just a glass of water." "Please," Aaliyah replied gently. Chloe nodded curtly. "Fine." She poured the water, but instead of handing it over, she slammed it onto the tray table. The cup tipped liquid spilling, splashing across the table and down Aaliyah's coat. The sound, a sharp splash, echoed like a slap in the still cabin. For a moment, no one breathed. Aaliyah looked at the spreading puddle. Chloe didn't apologize. "Oh, sorry," she said flatly, arms crossed. "Didn't mean to. You know turbulence." From the back, Ethan Miles' head snapped up. Tara Simmons, now seated nearby, stood abruptly. "You just spilled water on a passenger." Chloe turned sharply. "I said it wasn't on purpose. Are you going to teach me my job now?" The words dropped like ice. The entire cabin went silent again, the hum of the engines the only sound. Even that mechanical drone now felt like a heartbeat, fast, heavy, collective. Aaliyah picked up a napkin and calmly dabbed her coat. Then she looked up, eyes steady, voice calm as glass. "You know," she said softly, "turbulence only happens when someone loses control, not when the plane does." A ripple of low O's swept the cabin. Chloe froze, color draining from her face. Ethan strode forward, his tone sharp but measured. "Chloe, step to the back. Now!" "You don't get to order me around," she hissed. "Then tell me, what should these passengers think," he said, low and firm. "That we're allowed to throw water on people when we're tired." The murmur spread. Tara, the older man from row 15, the Latina woman from row 16, all watching, unblinking. "I saw her toss it," the man said clearly. "That wasn't an accident." "Yes," another woman added. "She's been rude since the start." It wasn't shouting. It was truth multiplied by many voices. And when truth spreads, it becomes undeniable. Chloe stepped back, trembling. Every gaze in the cabin was fixed on her now, not angry, not loud, but judging. And in that collective stare, she found herself utterly alone. Aaliyah set the empty cup aside, took out a small handkerchief, and said quietly, "I don't need your apology. I just need you to remember, in a place like this, everyone can see everything." Chloe's mouth opened, but no words came. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Sit down, Chloe. I'll take it from here." She jerked away, retreating behind the galley curtain, face rigid, eyes bright with something that looked like fear. The passengers watched her go. Those who had once been silent, the ones she dismissed, ignored, underestimated, were now the mirror reflecting her own cruelty back at her. On an airplane, everyone sits at the same height above the earth. No seat, no title, no skin tone makes anyone higher. And in that thin air, all illusions of superiority crumble fast. Chloe Denton, the self-appointed arbiter of who mattered and who didn't, stood stripped of her authority, left only with the echo of her own arrogance. And Aaliyah Brooks, the target of her disdain, sat calm, composed, her dignity unshaken. It was the purest reversal of power. True strength wasn't about position. It was about grace under fire. Behind the curtain, Chloe's hands trembled. She could hear them, the whispers, the passengers' voices, Ethan's calm reassurance, Aaliyah's soft "Thank you" to someone offering a napkin. Ordinary sounds, but to her, they felt like knives carving into the illusion she had built about herself. Ethan approached, his tone gentle but final. "Sit down. Chloe, 20 minutes to landing." She didn't answer. Tears welled not of remorse, but confusion. She couldn't understand how she'd become the villain in a story she thought she controlled. Aaliyah flipped open her notebook for the last time. One short line, written in neat ink. "The truth has spoken for itself. My part is done." She looked up, meeting the eyes of the people around her, eyes not of pity, but of respect. Tara smiled softly. Ethan gave a quiet nod, the faintest acknowledgement of understanding. Outside, the plane pierced through the final veil of clouds. Sunlight spilled through the window, painting Aaliyah's face in gold. It wasn't just the glow of sunset. It was the light of justice finally revealed. The cabin fell silent again, not in fear this time, but in peace. The storm had passed, and at its center sat the woman who had conquered it, not with anger, but with composure, intelligence, and quiet, unshakable strength. North Sky Flight 228 touched down in the soft, golden light of a Los Angeles evening. From the outside, it looked like any other arrival. The cabin doors opened. Passengers filed out. Flight attendants smiled and bowed. And the gentle announcement echoed, "Thank you for flying with North Sky Airlines." But only those who had been on that flight truly understood. Behind that polished farewell was a storm that had passed, leaving in its wake a silence named truth. Aaliyah Brooks tucked her notebook into her bag. She didn't speak, didn't accuse. She simply nodded goodbye to Tara and the nearby passengers. Tara took her hand, voice soft but firm. "Thank you. You made me believe people can still win by staying calm." "Not win, Tara," Aaliyah said with a faint smile. "Just let them see." Her steps down the jet bridge were light yet full of purpose. Behind her, Chloe Denton stood frozen by the cabin door, her face pale, her eyes hollow. Ethan Miles greeted passengers with a polite nod, deliberately avoiding her gaze. He didn't need to look to know he'd see someone who had just lost everything. While others turned toward baggage claim. Aaliyah walked straight past toward the North Sky Airlines customer service desk, where the company logo gleamed against a wall of glass. The young attendant smiled. "Good evening, Mom. How can I help you today? I need to speak with the senior operations manager," Aaliyah replied, her tone calm but edged with authority. "It's regarding flight NS-2208, which just landed." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the voice of someone who had the right to be heard, not the need to ask. The attendant blinked, then nodded quickly. "Of course. Please wait just a moment." 15 minutes later, Aaliyah was escorted into a private office. Inside, Richard Colton, North Sky's regional operations manager, stood to greet her. "Ms. Brooks, correct, I was told you had a concern about today's flight." "Not a concern," Aaliyah said evenly, shaking his hand. A report he repeated, frowning. Aaliyah reached into her bag and produced a small leather wallet. She opened it to reveal a federal ID, the embossed seal of the Federal Aviation Administration, shining under the light. "Aaliyah Brooks, FAA Inspector," she said clearly. "I was assigned to conduct an unannounced evaluation of domestic routes between Chicago and Los Angeles this quarter, and today that flight was NS-228. The room fell silent. The sunlight caught Richard's face, reflecting the sudden realization in his eyes. "You were an undercover inspector." "Yes," she replied, "and I believe your airline has a serious problem that requires immediate action." Aaliyah opened her folder. Inside were pages of notes, time-stamped audio clips, and still images discreetly captured from a camera embedded in her carry tag. She laid each item neatly on the desk. "Here is the complete record of Chief Flight Attendant Chloe Denton's behavior discriminatory conduct, verbal hostility, service violations, and falsified passenger reports. Every incident is documented. Multiple witnesses can verify what occurred." She looked up, eyes steady. "This isn't just unprofessional behavior. It's systemic bias reflected in tone, in selective service, and potentially in oversight. If her supervisors have been complicit, the issue extends beyond one employee." Richard turned the pages slowly, his shoulders sinking as he read. "Inspector Brooks, is this part of a formal FAA audit or your individual assessment?" "Both." Aaliyah replied, "I represent the FAA, but I was also hired by your company as a mystery passenger to evaluate internal service conduct." In short, she closed the folder. "I am the undercover inspector your airline sent to test itself." The words hung in the air like thunder. Power had shifted completely. The woman once dismissed, humiliated, disrespected was now the one signing off on the report that would define their future. Richard swallowed hard. "I had no idea her behavior was that severe." "We sincerely apologize." "Apologies won't fix it," Aaliyah said gently, yet firmly. "Action will, effective immediately. Chloe Denton must be suspended pending investigation. In addition, the FAA will require a full report on your company's training policies, passenger equity standards, and supervisory review protocols. He nodded heavily. Well, comply in full. Good. And I hope, Aaliyah said, her tone softening, that next time you train your staff, you teach them not just how to smile, but how to see people. As she exited the office, Aaliyah met Chloe in the corridor. The woman's face was ghost pale, her hands trembling. She'd just been summoned for an urgent discussion. Her voice cracked. You, who are you? Aaliyah stopped, met her eyes, and said quietly, just someone you thought you could look down on. Then, with a faint, sorrowful smile, but maybe today, you taught your company a lesson far more valuable than any flight manual. She walked past, leaving Chloe standing motionless, like someone jolted awake from a dream where power no longer belonged to her. Outside, the evening sky over Los Angeles deepened to indigo. Travelers moved through the terminal, unaware they had witnessed a silent revolution, a lesson in power, dignity, and consequence. Through the glass wall, Aaliyah paused. Flight NS-228 was being towed toward the hangar, its silver body gleaming in the fading light. In the reflection, she saw her own face calm, resolute, untouched by anger. In the sky, she thought, everyone flies at the same height. The only difference is whether they choose to look down or across. She turned away, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Behind her, the PA system chimed one last time. North Sky Airlines. Thank you for flying with us. But this time, that thank you wasn't just for the passengers. It was for the woman who made them remember their humanity. As Aaliyah Brooks stepped out of the North Sky Airlines headquarters, the Los Angeles sky was fading from gold to violet. She didn't look back. The glass doors slid shut behind her, dividing two worlds, one where truth had just been revealed, and another where people were now forced to face it. Inside, Chloe Denton sat motionless, hands clenched, eyes hollow. Hours ago, she had commanded an entire cabin. Now, she was the subject of an internal investigation. That can't be true. She was really an FAA inspector. Her voice broke in disbelief. Richard Colton, the regional manager, didn't answer. He simply placed the FAA identification copy and the report on the table. His voice was calm and cold. Yes, Chloe. She was. And she wasn't just representing the Federal Aviation Administration. She was also the mystery evaluator our own company hired to assess service standards. You know exactly how you treated her, don't you? Chloe's breath came shallow. Her face drained of color. I didn't mean she provoked. Provoked you how Richard cut in, voice sharp as glass. She asked for a blanket and a glass of water. You responded by humiliating her in front of passengers. Chloe's head dropped. The room fell into a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. Once, she had believed she controlled every smile, every word in her cabin. Now, that illusion of power evaporated like mist. Chloe Denton, Richard said deliberately, each word heavy, effective immediately. You are suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation. You are required to surrender your company badge, uniform, and all internal system access. The word suspended landed like metal on marble. Chloe's lips trembled, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to defend. Through the glass wall, Ethan Miles watched her walk out with red, tearful eyes. He didn't speak. He only sighed, that quiet kind of sorrow that comes when justice arrives, but still hurts like a sentence. In the administrative office, Chloe folded her uniform neatly on the desk, the silver badge reading Senior Flight Attendant. Her pride for 8 years now lay cold under fluorescent light. She stared at it for a long time. "I thought I was good at this," she whispered. "I thought I knew how to handle people." The young HR officer beside her kept her gaze down. No one condemned her out loud, but the silence in that room said more than any accusation ever could. The next day, North Sky Airlines issued an internal statement. A formal investigation has been launched following allegations of discriminatory conduct aboard Flight NS-228. All crew members present are required to provide written accounts. North Sky Airlines remains committed to fairness, respect, and zero tolerance for violations of professional ethics. The notice spread through the company network like wildfire. Staff message boards buzzed. Passengers from Flight 228 were contacted for testimony. Soon, cell phone footage surfaced online, brief clips of Chloe's tone, her dismissive glances, her cold demeanor sparking outrage across social media. Tara Simmons was among the first to be interviewed. Her voice was steady, unembellished. "She didn't just treat me poorly. It was everyone with darker skin. You could see it in every smile she didn't give, every glance that said we didn't belong. It wasn't what she said. It was how she looked at us." Others echoed the same. An older man said, "I've flown for 30 years. I've never seen a flight attendant act like that, not once." Piece by piece, the testimonies formed a picture, a portrait of prejudice, hidden beneath a mask of professionalism. 3 days later, Chloe sat at home, staring blankly at the TV. Her own face appeared on the local news, caught in grainy footage from a passenger's camera. Her clipped tone, her harsh posture, her disdain. North Sky Airlines faces investigation for alleged racial discrimination aboard Flight NS-228, the anchor said. An undercover FAA inspector confirmed participation in the flight. Chloe closed her eyes. Images replayed in her mind: the spilled water, the silent look from Aaliyah, the passengers rising to defend her. And she understood. It had never been hatred. It was blindness, the inability to see people as equals. She had mistaken arrogance for confidence, control for professionalism. A single tear fell late, but real. A week later, North Sky Airlines announced a sweeping reform: mandatory training on equity and cultural awareness for all staff, open forums where passengers could share stories of discrimination, and a new quality integrity program in partnership with the FAA placing undercover inspectors on random flights. Ethan was invited to co-lead a new module, Communication Under Pressure. His calm integrity during the NS-228 incident had become the model for ethical professionalism. Chloe, meanwhile, remained grounded, attending the required service awareness re-education course. Justice, as Aaliyah had always believed, wasn't about punishment. It was about confrontation, facing what you've done, and being given the chance to change. Aaliyah never returned to North Sky, but her report prompted the FAA to audit all 8 major domestic carriers. And Chloe, the woman who once believed she was just following policy, now sat quietly in a training room, notebook open, listening to a lecturer say prejudice is always born of malice. Sometimes, it's simply the habit of looking down and forgetting others can look back. Chloe bowed her head, a tear falling onto the blank page before her. Slowly, she wrote, "I forgot how to look across, not down." A month later, North Sky Airlines issued a statement thanking the FAA for helping us reestablish the standards of fairness and respect our passengers deserve. In her Washington, D.C. office, Aaliyah read the letter, smiled faintly, and set it aside. There was no triumph in her eyes, only peace. Up in the sky, she thought. No one flies higher than anyone else. The only difference is whether you choose to fly with dignity or choose to lower yourself. And thus, the story didn't end with punishment, but with awakening. The kind that reminds us that justice isn't about revenge. It's about rediscovering what it means to be human. A week had passed since the headline, "North Sky Airlines under federal investigation for discrimination," swept across every news feed in America. But inside Aaliyah Brooks' office at the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere remained calm, almost serene. On her desk lay the thick report labeled NS-228 Internal Review. Every page was meticulously organized witness statements, time-stamped notes, photographic evidence, the anatomy of truth, filed and bound. Aaliyah closed the final page gently, outside her window. The morning sky stretched clear and unbroken. Jets glided soundlessly across the horizon, as if nothing had changed. But she knew everything had. At 9 a.m., Aaliyah entered the FAA conference room. 3 members of the Oversight Committee were waiting, including Daniel Harper, the federal chief inspector who had assigned her the case. "Report on Flight NS-228 North Sky Airlines," she said, placing the file before him. Harper nodded, flipping open the cover. "I skimmed your summary. This doesn't read like an isolated ethics breach." "You're calling it systemic." Aaliyah met his gaze. "Yes, sir. From attitude to policy. They lack a transparent complaint system. Passengers who face discrimination have nowhere to turn, and staff who show bias aren't properly monitored." Harper leaned forward. "And your recommendations?" Aaliyah connected her laptop, projecting her presentation onto the screen. At the top, bold letters read, "Recommended Policy Reform, North Sky Airlines and Affiliate Programs." Her tone was calm, deliberate, the voice of someone who had witnessed the cost of silence. "First," she began, "North Sky must implement a diversity and inclusion awareness program led by independent experts, not symbolic workshops, but mandatory tested training. Second, they need an anonymous complaint portal, protecting whistleblowers and passengers from retaliation. Third, the FAA should introduce an equity compliance index, requiring all airlines to submit annual fairness reports as a condition for license renewal." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector and the sound of pens scribbling notes. After a moment, Harper exhaled, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ms. Brooks, you didn't just write a report. You drafted a reform policy." "Justice," she replied simply, "shouldn't just respond to damage. It should prevent it." 3 days later, Aaliyah was invited to North Sky Airlines headquarters. There, she was greeted by Evelyn Moore, the airline's CEO, a poised woman with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the air of someone who had learned to listen the hard way. "Ms. Brooks," Moore said quietly, "I've read every page of your report. On behalf of the company, I want to thank you not just for your investigation, but for your restraint. You could have gone public and destroyed us, but you chose integrity." Aaliyah smiled faintly. "I wasn't here to hurt your company, Mrs. Moore. I was here to make sure your company stops hurting others." Moore paused, then nodded slowly. "That sentence," she said, "will appear in our new policy." That afternoon, the airline held a press conference in the main auditorium. Reporters filled the hall. FAA representatives and North Sky employees took their seats. On stage, CEO Evelyn Moore faced the crowd. North Sky Airlines acknowledges the systemic shortcomings that allow disrespectful and discriminatory behavior to occur. Starting today, we are launching the SkyFair initiative built on 3 pillars. 1. Comprehensive diversity and equality training for all staff. 2. A service ethics council, co-supervised by FAA officials. 3. A reformed passenger feedback system. ensuring accountability at every level. The applause that followed was loud, but it was sincere. At the back of the room, Aaliyah watched quietly, her presence unannounced, her work already done. When the event ended, Evelyn Moore approached her and took her hand. "You know," she said softly, "I started as a flight attendant myself. If you'd fought back with anger that day, this might be ended in chaos, headlines, bitterness, but instead, you forced an entire system to change not by rage, but by reason." Aaliyah's eyes drifted toward the window, where daylight was spilling in. "Anger makes people listen," she said. "Calm makes them think." 2 weeks later, other airlines began announcing similar reforms. The FAA issued Federal Advisory 2025 FARC Fairness and Awareness Regulation, requiring every airline employee nationwide to undergo annual equity awareness evaluations. Across aviation forums, thousands of flight attendants shared their stories. Quiet confessions of bias, lessons learned, and small acts of empathy that changed flights for the better. What began as a single scandal had become a movement, a moral recalibration for an entire industry. One morning, at Washington, D.C. Airport, Aaliyah noticed a new North Sky billboard. It showed flight attendants of every color, gender, and age standing shoulder to shoulder beneath a clear blue sky. The slogan read, "The sky has no bias. We fly for everyone." Aaliyah smiled softly, not out of pride, but relief, because in the end, she hadn't wanted to prove she was right. She only wanted to prove that everyone deserved to be treated right. Outside, a plane roared down the runway, lifting into the open sky, leaving behind a long white contrail like a signature across the heavens. Aaliyah watched it fade, and her heart whispered the truth that had guided her all along under the same sky. No one stands higher than anyone else. The only difference is how we choose to treat one another. When the Sky Fair, the Fair Skies program, officially launched, no one spoke of North Sky Flight 228 as a scandal anymore. It had become a milestone the way people speak of a storm that once raged through, only to leave the sky clearer than before. But for those who had lived through that storm, the aftermath didn't exist on paper. It lived inside them. One April morning, Chloe Denton opened an email from North Sky Airlines Human Resources after reviewing the investigation results. "The management board has decided to terminate your employment with immediate effect." There was no surprise left in her. She read the line again and again, eyes still, heartbeat quiet. Her hands trembled, but her heart felt like ashes. Everything that had once defined her, the crisp uniform, the name badge, the polished smile that accompanied, "Thank you for flying north," sky was now just a memory. Standing before the mirror, Chloe studied her own reflection. The woman staring back was the same, yet her eyes were not. No longer the confident gaze of someone certain she was right, but the searching eyes of someone finally learning to look inward. She whispered, almost to herself, "I forgot sometimes a single look of contempt can wound deeper than 1,000 words." While Chloe stepped away from aviation, North Sky Airlines began changing from within. New posters lined the HR corridors, bearing a simple slogan, "Respect above all." Weekly cultural awareness workshops became part of every crew's schedule. New recruits were no longer just taught how to serve passengers, but how to see them without judgment. On the first page of the new training manual, a line stood out in italic script, "Remember, every passenger is a story. You never know who you're serving." The author of that line was Ethan Miles, once the junior attendant on Flight 228, now promoted to service training supervisor. He led the sessions himself, retelling the events of that day, not to shame anyone, but to show how a single careless choice could cost both a career and a conscience. One quiet afternoon, Aaliyah Brooks received a hand-delivered envelope at her FAA office. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged. It was from Tara Simmons. Aaliyah, I never thought I could speak up in front of a crowd, and I never believed anyone would listen. But that day when you stayed calm amid the insults, I saw something he'd never seen before. Dignity can be stronger than power. Thank you for showing me that silence isn't weakness sometimes. It's the only way the light can shine through. Aaliyah read the letter slowly, setting it beside her coffee cup. Her eyes softened, shimmering faintly. It wasn't gratitude she saw in those words. It was proof that courage could be contagious. A few days later, Aaliyah ran into Ethan at an FAA conference. He approached with a respectful nod. Inspector Brooks, I just wanted to thank you. If you hadn't kept your composure that day, I don't think I'd have found the courage to speak up. Aaliyah smiled gently. You don't owe me thanks. Ethan, you made the right choice, and that's why I respect you. He nodded, thoughtful. Maybe that was the first time I truly understood what it means to serve people, not just passengers. That night, back home, Aaliyah opened the same small notebook she had used on flight NS-228. The ink had faded slightly, a tiny water stain on the corner from when she'd written in turbulence. She reread the first line. Initial observation flight attendant Chloe Denton demeanor changes when interacting with passengers of color. Then her eyes moved to the last line. No one is born with prejudice. It survives only until someone has the courage to confront it. A soft smile crossed her face. Sometimes, change didn't come from grand gestures, but from one person patient enough to stay silent when it mattered, and to speak when it counted most. A month later, the National Aviation Journal published a feature titled North Sky Airlines from Scandal to Symbol of Reform. It mentioned an unnamed FAA inspector, a woman whose calm conviction had sparked a wave of industry-wide awareness. No photo, no interview, just a single quote printed beneath the headline. You can't change people through anger, but you can make them change themselves through truth. The article spread quickly, becoming part of FAA's official ethics and aviation training curriculum. One late afternoon, Aaliyah stood by the tall glass window at DOZ Airport, watching planes lift off into the orange glow of sunset. Each one rose, shrinking into the clouds. No first class, no economy, no attendants or passengers. Up there, everyone was the same. Ethan passed by, spotting her. Do you think fairness really exists? He asked quietly. Aaliyah smiled. No, she said, it doesn't just exist. But if enough people keep choosing what's right, it can be built, piece by piece, every day. A jet soared above them, leaving behind a thin white trail across the burning sky. Aaliyah watched it fade, eyes calm yet bright-filled with the quiet certainty that had carried her through it all. Change doesn't always come from those in power. Sometimes it begins with one person who simply refuses to let go of their dignity. As the last North Sky Airlines flight of the day disappeared into the pale orange horizon, Aaliyah Brooks remained by the terminal window. The airport's noise faded into a distant hum. Only the faint voice of the intercom lingered. She exhaled softly, not out of fatigue, but from a quiet sense of peace. What she had done was never about winning. It was about restoring fairness, something so small. People often forget when they've lost it. At a small cafe near the gate, Aaliyah sat with her worn notebook open under the soft gold of evening light. She wrote the closing lines of her final report to the FAA. Discrimination doesn't always wear a name tag. It hides in a glance, in selective greetings, in who receives a smile and who does not. She paused, lifting her gaze. Passengers queued at their gates. Staff gave directions. A young flight attendant knelt to help an elderly brown-skinned man with his bag, smiling warmly. To anyone else, it was an ordinary scene. To Aaliyah, it was proof the roots of change had begun to grow. Then a familiar voice behind her said softly, "Inspector Brooks." Aaliyah turned. Standing there was Chloe Denton, no uniform, hair tied neatly back, a small travel bag at her side. Chloe hesitated, then spoke. "I wasn't sure if I should approach you, but I wanted to say thank you. I've been taking the FAA's community retraining program. I realize my pride hurt people in ways I never saw." Aaliyah studied her face not with judgment, but understanding. "What matters," she said gently, "is that you chose to see it now." Chloe gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "I'm still learning, but this time, I'm learning how to be human, not just how to be praised." They stood in silence, the airport's boarding calls echoing softly around them. A brief moment, but enough to show that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's giving someone the chance to do better. As Chloe walked away, Aaliyah closed her eyes. Images replayed the spilled glass of water, the cutting look, the moment of silence, the applause, the vast open sky beyond. All the fragments of a lesson she knew would stay with her forever. She wrote one last line in her notebook. When we answer insult with intellect, we don't just protect our dignity, we force the world to face its reflection. Weeks later, in the training hall for new FAA inspectors, Aaliyah stood before a room of fresh faces, young, eager, idealistic. They would soon enter the same world she once had, a world modern on the surface, yet shadowed by old prejudices. She shared her story. No airline names, no accusations, only the power of calm and self-respect. You'll meet people who won't respect you because of your skin, your gender, your position. They'll try to make you angry. But when you choose composure, you hold up a mirror and they'll be forced to see themselves. The room fell silent. Then, a quiet wave of applause filled the hall. Not loud, but sincere. That evening, Aaliyah boarded a flight home this time. Just a passenger. Beside her sat a young white couple. Behind her, an elderly Asian woman. Across the aisle, a black man reading a paperback. The attendant, a young woman with bright eyes, smiled warmly at each of them. No difference, no hesitation. When the attendant handed her a cup of water, Aaliyah smiled back. She didn't need to check the name tag. She already knew change was happening, one simple gesture at a time. Outside the window, the sky glowed gold. The plane sliced through the clouds, leaving a thin white trail against the blue. Aaliyah thought, equality isn't erasing differences, it's honoring them as part of what makes us human. Her voice calm, steady, echoed like an inner monologue, the kind that lingers long after the story fades. Discrimination doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it hides in silence, in glances, in the quiet way we think we're above someone else. But justice isn't punishment. It's the journey where each of us learns to face our own flaws and rise from them. The plane soared higher, cutting through the crimson sunset. Her voice deepened, almost like a final benediction. We don't need to be inspectors or people in power to make change. We just need to refuse silence in the face of wrong and meet it with reason and with grace. The final image lingered, the wide, endless sky, glowing in soft gold. A single line appeared against the light. Justice is not revenge. It's the reminder that every human being deserves respect. Dear friends, the story, Flight Attendant, refuses to serve a black woman only to learn. She's a secret airline inspector isn't just an incident in the sky. It's a mirror, a reflection of our society in miniature. It reminds us that discrimination doesn't always roar in grand gestures. Sometimes it whispers in a glance, a tone, a choice of who we treat with warmth and who we overlook. When we're hurt or insulted, anger feels like the natural response. But as Aliyah, the woman in this story, proved its wisdom and composure that hold the true power to spark change across an entire system, life may not always be fair, but each of us can plant a seed of justice through kindness, fairness, and the courage to speak up when something's wrong. And if someone has ever hurt you, remember this. Responding with compassion is not weakness, it's proof of the nobility within your soul. Sometimes, that calm strength becomes the first ripple of a better world, a world where people see one another with respect, not prejudice. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts, where we bring you more inspiring tales of compassion, fairness, and the quiet power of human dignity. Thank you for listening and for standing with us. Because every share, every gesture, no matter how small, can help change a perception and maybe change the world.